No man could defeat her, the tribe had said, but none of them had seen Ethan Cole. He was a cowboy, used to the wild stretches of open land, the long nights by the fire, and the steady rhythm of his work. He didn't care for stories about Apache warriors or the legends of indestructible women. But when he rode into the valley that day, something about the air felt different. The dust kicked up around him, but it wasn't the usual dry wind that carried the scent of sagebrush. This felt like something else, a warning, or maybe just fate. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land as he approached the clearing. There, standing tall and unmoving like a mountain, was Ayanna Red Hawk. She had heard the whispers. She had lived them. Her reputation had spread like wildfire across the plains. The tribe had tried to teach others that no man could defeat her, but there she was, watching as Ethan approached, his horse's hooves echoing in the silence. He had no weapon, no knife, no gun, just a quiet determination in his eyes, and a refusal to let the world define who he was. Ayanna's eyes narrowed, her stance unwavering. She had fought and defeated every man who tried to challenge her, but she had never met one who walked into the valley like he didn't fear death. She stood tall, stronger than any mountain, the leader of her people, but something in the air shifted. She was used to fear, respect, and the raw power of a good fight. But this was different. Ethan didn't take the challenge. He didn't swing his fist or pull his gun. He stood there, watching her, as if he didn't need to prove a thing. He didn't move. He didn't speak. It was as if the very weight of his presence pushed against the laws of nature. She stepped forward, the ground underfoot barely shifting with her movement. The tribe waited, watching in silence, as if they too didn't know what to expect. "Turn back," Ayanna said, her voice low but carrying across the wide, empty space. Ethan didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. He just stood there, as still as she was, his dark eyes meeting hers with an intensity that was impossible to ignore. The sun dipped lower, casting an orange glow over everything. The quiet stretched out between them, hanging in the air like a live wire. Ayanna's pulse quickened, not from fear, but from something else, something that told her she had never encountered a man like this before. No man had ever dared to stand before her without raising a weapon or threatening violence. But this cowboy, this strange man who had refused to fight, seemed different. There was power in his silence, strength in his stillness. Ethan Cole wasn't afraid. And for the first time, Ayanna wondered if there was a kind of strength that didn't require a fight. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of sage and the faintest trace of the river. Ayanna stood motionless, her eyes never leaving Ethan. The tribe behind her remained silent, but their gaze never wavered. Ethan felt their eyes on him, but he didn't flinch. The silence was deafening, and for the first time in his life, he wondered if he was meant to fight at all. Ayanna's piercing gaze softened for the briefest moment, just enough for Ethan to notice. She stepped closer, her footsteps light but purposeful, the ground beneath her barely disturbed by her presence. "You do not belong here," she said, her voice low, yet it carried the weight of an entire nation. "This land is ours, and you will not take it from us." Ethan didn't speak, not right away. His mind was racing, not with thoughts of how to win or lose, but with questions he hadn't asked himself before. Why had he come here? What had drawn him to this place? "I am not here to take anything from you," Ethan replied finally, his voice steady. "I am here because I need to understand." Ayanna stopped just a few feet away from him. She was tall, taller than most men, her posture perfect, commanding. Yet there was something vulnerable in the way she held herself, a guarded strength that came from years of fighting, not just for survival, but for something more. "Understand what?" she asked, her brow furrowing slightly, the first sign of curiosity breaking through her usual stoic demeanor. Ethan took a breath, his eyes searching hers. "The stories," he said. "The legends about you, about your people. I've heard them all my life, and I want to know the truth. Are you a warrior? A protector? A leader?" Ayanna studied him in silence, her expression unreadable. She wasn't used to being questioned, especially not by someone who had no reason to believe in her, someone who had likely heard the same lies everyone else had told about her people. But there was something in Ethan's eyes that made her hesitate. "I am a protector," she said slowly. "And a leader, yes. But I am not what you think. No one ever is." The words hung between them. the meaning clear even though she hadn't said much. Ayanna wasn't just a warrior. She was a symbol of everything that had been stolen, everything that had been fought for. Ethan realized then that she wasn't just standing before him as a woman. She was standing as an entire culture, an entire history, one that had been buried under centuries of misunderstandings. "I'm sorry for what's happened," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "But I didn't come to fight you. I came because I think there's more to this story than anyone's been willing to tell." Ayanna's gaze softened again, but she didn't let her guard down. "And what makes you think I will tell you?" she asked, her voice still steady, though there was a flicker of something deeper in her eyes. Ethan stepped forward, but only a little, just enough to show he wasn't afraid. "Because I won't fight you. Not like the others. I won't treat you like a threat. I'll treat you like someone who deserves respect. That's all I can offer." There was a pause, a long stretch of silence where nothing seemed to move, not even the wind. Ayanna's eyes locked onto his, searching for something she wasn't sure she would find. She had never met anyone who refused to fight, and for a moment, she wondered if Ethan was just like all the others who had come before him, pretending to be different. But something in his eyes told her otherwise. Something told her he meant it. And for the first time in a long time, Ayanna wondered if maybe, just maybe, there could be more to a man than the violence he was expected to bring. "You don't understand," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I am willing to let you try." And in that moment, something shifted between them, something that neither of them could put into words. Ethan had not come to conquer her, and Ayanna had not come to destroy him. They had come to meet somewhere in between. The tribe waited, still and silent, unsure of what would happen next, but knowing that whatever came next would change them all forever. The sun dipped lower, casting the desert in shades of amber and gold as the wind swept across the barren land. Ethan stood beside Ayanna, the silence between them now comfortable, almost peaceful, as the rest of the tribe watched from a distance. The stillness felt like a moment suspended in time, a pause before everything changed. Ayanna glanced at the horizon, her gaze distant, but her presence as commanding as ever. "I've seen many men come and go," she said, her voice steady but tinged with something else, perhaps the weight of experience. "Most of them think they can break what has been built, take what was never theirs to begin with." Ethan watched her, sensing there was more to her words than she was letting on. "And what about you?" he asked, his voice soft but curious. "What have you built?" Ayanna turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a quiet intensity, she spoke. "I've built a people, a legacy. We fight to protect what is ours, not out of greed, but out of necessity. The land, our traditions, our way of life. They are all that we have left." Ethan absorbed her words, his mind racing as he thought about the land he had come from, the land that was slowly disappearing under the weight of progress and greed. "I understand," he said finally, his tone sincere. "But maybe it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe there's another way for us all to live." Ayanna raised an eyebrow, intrigued but skeptical. "And what is that way?" Ethan took a step closer, the heat of the sun still heavy on his skin. "I don't have all the answers," he said. "But I believe in finding common ground, in understanding each other, even when it seems impossible." Ayanna studied him carefully, her sharp eyes piercing into his. She had heard similar words from others before, but they had always been followed by violence or betrayal. This time, though, there was something different about him. There was a quiet conviction in his voice, something she hadn't seen in many men who came to the land with hopes of conquest. She felt a strange pull toward him, but she didn't know if it was because of his words or the way he stood before her, unafraid and unwavering. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice low. "The world we live in isn't kind. It's harsh and unforgiving. No one gets by without fighting for what they want." Ethan nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know," he said, "but maybe we don't have to fight each other to survive. Maybe we can fight for something greater." Ayanna looked at him for a long time, as if trying to read the truth in his eyes. She had lived her life by a code of survival, a code that demanded strength and the willingness to fight for what was hers. But now, standing in front of Ethan, she wondered if there was another way. The wind picked up again, swirling around them, carrying with it the scent of the earth and the promise of something new. Ayanna broke the silence, her voice softer now. You're asking for something that seems impossible, she said, almost as if to herself. But maybe there's a chance. I won't promise anything, but I'll listen. Ethan smiled, a small but genuine smile. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was something. Ayanna turned toward her people, who were still watching, waiting. They didn't understand what was happening, but they trusted her. And that trust, for the first time, felt like a gift. We have a long way to go, Ayanna said, her voice carrying over to the tribe. But maybe, just maybe, there's a path forward that doesn't lead to war. The tribe murmured, their skepticism clear, but Ayanna's words had planted a seed. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the world in twilight, a new chapter began to unfold. And in that moment, Ethan knew that despite the distance between their worlds, they had taken the first step towards something better. The days that followed were quiet, but the air between Ethan and Ayanna seemed to hum with an unspoken understanding. The tribe remained cautious, observing from a distance, but there was a shift, a subtle change in the way they looked at the cowboy. He wasn't like the others, they could see. That much. But would he prove them wrong? Ayanna spent her days training the younger members of the tribe, preparing them for whatever might come. Ethan, though, never strayed too far. He worked with the horses, helping where he could, offering a steady hand when needed. He wasn't there to take control. He wasn't there to fight. But somehow, he became part of the rhythm of their daily lives, like a strange but necessary element in a world that didn't quite make sense. One evening, as the sun began its slow descent beyond the mountains, Ethan approached Ayanna. She was by the river, her back to him, her gaze focused on the rushing water. He hesitated, unsure of how to break the silence that had grown between them. Ayanna, he called softly, his voice carrying over the sound of the river. She turned, meeting his eyes with a mixture of curiosity and guardedness. "What's on your mind, cowboy?" she asked, her tone almost playful, but there was a sharpness to it, like a reminder that she hadn't fully trusted him yet. Ethan took a step closer, his boots crunching on the dry earth. "I've been thinking," he said, his gaze never leaving hers, "about what you said. About finding a different way. A way that doesn't involve fighting." Ayanna studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "And?" she prompted, her voice steady, though there was an edge of caution. Ethan took a breath, then slowly exhaled, his words coming slower now, as if he was testing them in his mind before letting them leave his mouth. "I don't think we'll ever change anything if we keep holding on to the past. There's a lot of pain there. I know that. But maybe, just maybe, there's a way for both of us to live without it all coming to blows." Ayanna didn't speak immediately. She turned her gaze back to the river, watching the water flow past them, relentless and unchanging. "You want to believe in something, Ethan," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "But you don't know the whole story. You don't know what it's like to lose everything, to have everything you love stripped away by people who don't care about you, who don't see you as human. That's what we've been fighting against. For generations." Ethan felt the weight of her words settle over him. He had heard the stories, but hearing it from her, seeing the truth in her eyes, made it real. "I know," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but I believe that fighting isn't the only answer. I believe there's another way." Ayanna turned back to him, her gaze intense. She studied him for a long moment, as if searching for the man behind the words, for the truth in his eyes. "You don't know the land the way we do," she said, her voice lowering. "You don't know the land we're protecting. It's not just dirt and stone. It's everything. It's life. It's our history. And once it's gone, we can't get it back." Ethan nodded slowly, the gravity of her words settling in his chest. "I understand that," he said, his voice softer now, filled with a sincerity that he hoped she could hear. "But maybe we can find a way to protect it without destroying each other." For a long time, there was silence between them, broken only by the sound of the river rushing by. The wind had died down, leaving the air still and cool. Ayanna turned her head slightly, looking out across the river, her expression unreadable. Then, almost as if to herself, she spoke. "Maybe, but we've been fighting for so long, Ethan. It's hard to imagine anything else." Ethan stepped closer, closing the distance between them, but still keeping his distance. "I don't expect you to forget, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. If you'll let me, I'll help however I can." Ayanna met his gaze again, her eyes softer now, the sharpness gone for the moment. She nodded, just once, acknowledging the unspoken agreement between them. She didn't know if Ethan's way was the right way, but for the first time, she wondered if it might be worth trying. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting a final burst of color across the sky, there was a sense of possibility in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the plains, casting long shadows across the land. Ethan was already awake, sitting on a large rock by the edge of the river, his gaze fixed on the water. The events of the previous day weighed heavily on his mind, but there was something different in the air today. The tension that had once been so thick between him and Ayanna seemed to have shifted, just slightly, into something more palpable, something unspoken. He could feel it, the way the air around them hummed with possibility. Ayanna approached, her steps soft but certain, her silhouette framed by the rising sun. She had been up before him, as she always was, tending to the needs of her people, overseeing their training. But today, she moved differently, as if the weight of her decision had settled into her bones. Ethan stood when he saw her, his eyes meeting hers as she drew closer. "Morning," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Ayanna nodded, acknowledging him without speaking. She stepped up to the rock beside him, her gaze moving to the river, watching the water flow as if it could carry away the uncertainty between them. "I've been thinking," she said after a long pause, her voice soft, yet resolute. Ethan turned slightly to face her, waiting. "About what you said," she continued. "About finding another way." She looked at him then, her eyes steady but searching. "I'm not sure it's possible," she said, her words carrying the weight of years spent fighting for survival, for her people, for their land. "We've been taught to fight, to protect what's ours by any means necessary. It's hard to imagine a different path." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He let her words hang in the air, feeling the weight of them, understanding the burden they carried. "I know," he said finally, his voice soft. "But maybe we've been taught the wrong lessons." Ayanna's eyes narrowed slightly, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone laced with curiosity and caution. "I mean," Ethan began, his gaze turning back to the flowing river, "that maybe fighting isn't the only way to protect what matters. Maybe there's a strength in peace, in finding common ground, in understanding each other." Ayanna looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she didn't speak, only watched the water as it carried away the dust and debris from the previous days. Ethan stood there beside her, his thoughts racing, wondering if his words were reaching her, wondering if she would see the same possibility he saw. Finally, Ayanna spoke again, her voice quieter now, as if she was choosing her words carefully. "I've lost everything," she said, her gaze turning inward, as if the memory of it all weighed heavily on her heart. "My family, my people, my land. Every time we take a step forward, it feels like the world pushes us back." Her voice was steady, but there was a vulnerability in it that Ethan hadn't heard before. "And you think we can fix that?" she asked, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of hope and skepticism. Ethan met her gaze, his heart heavy with the truth of her words. "I don't know if we can fix it," he said quietly, "but I believe we can start by not fighting, by listening to each other. Maybe that's the first step." Ayanna's expression softened, just for a moment, before she turned away. She walked a few paces, her mind clearly turning over his words, the possibility of them, like a seed planted deep within her. Ethan watched her, his thoughts a whirlwind. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. Ayanna was a woman of strength, of conviction, and if anyone could lead a change, it was her. He had seen it in the way she carried herself, in the way she led her people. But now, he hoped she would see that strength could also be found in choosing a different path. He followed her, staying just behind as she made her way toward the camp. The tribe was already gathering, their faces a mixture of uncertainty and hope. Ayanna stopped just short of the group and turned to face them, her posture strong and commanding. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice carrying across the camp. "We've been fighting for so long, but maybe it's time for a new way. A way where we don't have to fight each other to protect what we love." The tribe fell silent, their eyes locked on her as she spoke, as if waiting for her to say more, to explain. Ayanna took a deep breath, her eyes shifting to Ethan for a brief moment before returning to her people. I'm not saying it will be easy, she continued. But maybe it's time we stop fighting each other and start fighting for something better. For peace. For a future where we can all live in this land, together. The silence that followed was thick, but there was something in the air now. Something hopeful. Something that hadn't been there before. Ethan knew it wasn't a promise, but it was a beginning. Ayana's words weren't a declaration of victory. They were a call to listen, a call to find a new way. And for the first time, Ethan believed it could be done. The morning after Ayana spoke, a subtle shift began to take hold of the tribe. It wasn't loud or sudden, but it was there, like the quiet breeze that brushed through the tall grasses, unnoticed unless you took a moment to feel it. The members of the tribe began to speak less among themselves and watch more closely. Ethan, ever the outsider, was still learning the rhythms of their world, but he could sense the change in the air. Ayana had opened a door, and now it was up to them all to decide whether they would step through it or close it behind them. As the days passed, Ayana led her people in quiet, thoughtful discussions. They spoke not only of their past, but of what their future might look like. They discussed the possibility of peace, not just with the settlers or the surrounding lands, but with themselves. Ethan spent his days learning, listening, and contributing when he could. He didn't have all the answers, but he had something that Ayana had said was just as important, an open heart. As the sun set on the 5th day after the conversation, Ayana and Ethan sat by the river again, their presence a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them. The tribe was gathered near the fire, the warmth of the flames flickering in their faces, but their eyes often drifted toward the two who had started this quiet revolution. Do you think they'll listen? Ethan asked, his voice low, his gaze still on the water. Ayana glanced over at him, her expression unreadable. They're not sure what to make of it, she said. But they'll listen. They always listen when the words come from the right place. Ethan nodded, absorbing her words. He had come to realize just how difficult this path was for her. It wasn't about just convincing the tribe to consider peace. It was about leading them through years of pain, loss, and war. And you? He asked, his voice softening. What do you think? Ayana paused, her eyes searching the horizon as the colors of the evening sky deepened. I think, she said slowly, that we can't keep fighting forever. Something has to give. But that doesn't mean it'll be easy. It doesn't mean they'll all agree. Ethan turned his head to meet her gaze, sensing the weight of the decision resting on her shoulders. I didn't come here to change you, he said quietly. I came here to see if there was a chance for us both. For all of us. Ayana didn't answer at first. The silence between them grew, stretching out into the distance, into the horizon that seemed to go on forever. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. It's hard, you know, believing in something different. When all you've known is war and loss, it's hard to imagine anything else. Ethan nodded, understanding more deeply than words could express. He had his own scars, his own losses, but they were different, and he knew that. But I'm here, he said, his voice firm. And I'm not leaving. Not unless you tell me to. I want to see this through. Ayana's gaze softened, a faint glimmer of something unspoken passing between them. You don't know what you're asking, she said, almost to herself. You don't know what it's like to have everything stripped away. But you're right. Maybe there's a way. Maybe we can build something new. The wind picked up, the sound of the river growing louder as it rushed past them. Ayana stood up, dusting the earth from her clothes. Let's go back to the others, she said, her voice now steady, her decision made. It's time they heard the truth. Ethan stood as well, following her lead. Together, they walked back to the camp, side by side. The tribe was waiting, their faces full of questions, but there was also something new in the air. A flicker of hope. Ayana stepped in front of the gathered tribe, her presence commanding as always. We've come a long way, she began, her voice strong. But we're not finished yet. The path we're walking will be difficult, but it's the only way forward. The tribe remained quiet, their eyes fixed on her as she spoke. Ayana took a deep breath, her heart steadying. I can't promise you peace tomorrow, or even the next day, but I can promise you this, we will try. We will listen. We will find a way to live together. The murmurs began, soft at first, as the tribe exchanged uncertain looks. But as Ayana stood there, her shoulders squared, her resolve unwavering, something shifted again. A chance, however small, had been given. And maybe, just maybe, it was enough to start something new. The days that followed were filled with quiet moments, small exchanges, and long silences. But there was a sense of something new taking root within the tribe. The initial uncertainty began to shift, slowly but surely. Ayanna, who had once held her people together with the strength of her resolve and her fierce determination, now found herself standing at the center of something much bigger than herself. She was still a leader, but the role felt different now, as if the weight of the responsibility had shifted, no longer just about survival, but about something more, about hope. Ethan, ever present by her side, continued to lend his steady hand. He wasn't here to take charge or impose his ways. He was here to learn, to listen, and to walk with Ayanna through the path she had chosen. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but something about the quiet strength he saw in her gave him hope. The tribe was watching closely, their eyes filled with doubt and curiosity. Some were willing to give this new way a chance, while others remained skeptical, unwilling to let go of the old ways that had kept them alive for so long. But even those who doubted couldn't help but notice the change in the air. They didn't know what the future held, but the possibility of something better was enough to keep them listening. It was on the 8th day, as the sun set behind the mountains, that Ayanna called a meeting. The tribe gathered around the fire, the flames flickering and dancing in the cool evening breeze. There was an intensity in the air, an energy that hadn't been there before. Ayanna stood before them, her posture strong, but her eyes were filled with a quiet determination. Ethan stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. "I know many of you are still unsure," Ayanna began, her voice carrying over the crackling fire. "You've seen the world change, you've seen it take everything from us. And now, I ask you, to trust me when I say that we have a chance to change things, to build something that doesn't rely on fighting, on killing, on taking what isn't ours." The tribe listened, their faces unreadable, but their eyes were fixed on her, hanging on every word. "This won't be easy. We've been fighting for so long, and it's hard to imagine a different way. But maybe we don't have to fight. Maybe we can protect what is ours without losing who we are in the process." Ethan stepped forward then, his voice low but clear. "I'm not here to lead you, and I'm not here to take your land or your way of life. I'm here because I believe we can all live together. I've seen the strength in your people, in Ayanna, and I believe that strength can build a future where we don't have to fight to survive." Ayanna turned to him, her eyes meeting his for a moment before she spoke again. "Ethan is right. This isn't just about what we want. It's about what we can offer each other. A chance to rebuild, to make something stronger than the hatred and the bloodshed that has marked our past." There was a long pause, the fire crackling softly as the tribe took in her words. Ayanna had always been a symbol of strength, but now, she was something more. She was a beacon of hope, a symbol of a future that didn't have to be defined by violence. The tribe sat in silence, the weight of her words settling into their hearts. Finally, one of the elders, an older woman with deep lines carved into her face, spoke. "We've seen war," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "We've seen it take everything we love, but we have also seen how it destroys us. Maybe it's time to try something different." Another elder, a man with graying hair, nodded slowly. "It's not an easy choice," he said, his voice rough with the years of battle. "But we have nothing left to lose. Maybe it's worth a chance." Ayanna nodded, her gaze sweeping over the tribe. "We don't have to agree on everything, but we can agree to try, to listen, to build something that honors who we are, without tearing us apart." The tribe fell silent again, and this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't filled with uncertainty or doubt, it was filled with possibility. The fire crackled and popped, casting flickering shadows over the faces of the tribe as they began to murmur among themselves. The decision had been made. Ayanna's words had planted the seed, and now, it was up to them all to nurture it. As the night wore on, the tribe began to talk openly, their voices rising in a chorus of hope, of something new, something they hadn't allowed themselves to believe in for so long. Ethan stood beside Ayanna, watching as the tribe slowly began to turn toward each other, the walls of distrust starting to crack. They weren't there yet, but they had taken the first step. And for the first time, Ethan believed in the possibility of a future where they didn't have to fight to survive. The days that followed were filled with more quiet moments, but they were different now. The air around the camp had shifted, and there was a sense of calm that had not been there before. Ayanna could feel it in the way the tribe moved, in the way they spoke to one another. There was a new openness, a willingness to listen. Ethan remained a steady presence by her side, but it was clear that this change had to come from within. He couldn't lead them. He couldn't force them. This was Ayanna's journey, and she was the one who had to guide them forward. The sun rose one morning, casting a soft light over the land, and Ayanna knew it was time. The tribe had gathered by the river, a place where they had often gone to reflect, to find peace. Today, they had come to talk about the future, to decide what they would do next. Ayanna stood before them, her gaze sweeping over the gathered faces. The silence was thick, but it was no longer filled with doubt. It was filled with hope. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady but filled with a quiet strength. "We've talked about the future," she said. "We've talked about what it might look like, and we've talked about the challenges we'll face. But now, it's time to make a choice. A choice to move forward, to build something new." She paused, letting her words settle. She could feel the weight of them, and she knew. The decision wasn't going to be easy. We can keep fighting, keep holding on to the old ways, to the ways of violence and distrust. But I don't believe that's the way forward. I believe there is another path. A path where we can live in peace, where we can build something stronger than the fear that has held us for so long. The tribe was silent, each person weighing her words in their own way. Ayanna's heart was heavy with the knowledge that not all of them would agree. But she also knew that she couldn't make this decision for them. They had to decide for themselves. After a long moment, one of the elders, a man who had fought in many battles, stepped forward. His eyes were tired, but there was something in his gaze that wasn't there before. "I've seen a lot of things in my time," he said, his voice rough but steady. "I've seen a lot of bloodshed, a lot of loss. And I've lost a lot myself. But what you're saying, Ayanna, it makes sense. We've been fighting for so long, and we have nothing left but each other. Maybe it's time to try something different." Another elder, a woman with long gray hair, nodded slowly. "I agree," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "We've been torn apart by fighting, by fear. It's time to build something stronger, something we can leave behind for our children." Ayanna's heart lifted, just a little, at their words. It wasn't an easy choice for them, but they were starting to see what she saw. The possibility of a future built on something more than survival, more than war. The conversation continued, each person sharing their thoughts, their hopes, their fears. Some were still uncertain, still clinging to the old ways, but the majority were beginning to see the potential of this new path. They were beginning to see that peace didn't mean weakness, that strength could be found in unity. As the sun set on that day, Ayanna looked around at the faces of her people. They were still her people, the same people who had followed her through battles, through hardships. But today, they were different. They were willing to try something new. And that was enough for now. Ethan stood beside her, watching the tribe, watching them begin to accept what had been so hard for them to accept before. Peace. It was a long road ahead, and Ayanna knew there would be challenges. There would be those who would resist, who would refuse to let go of the past. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. They had taken the first step, and that was something worth fighting for. The days stretched on, and the rhythm of the tribe's life slowly began to change. The initial hesitation was still there, but now it was mixed with something new, a quiet resolve, a sense of possibility. Ayanna, standing at the center of it all, could feel the weight of her decisions, but the shift in the air was undeniable. The tribe was listening. They were beginning to believe, however cautiously, that peace was worth pursuing. Ethan stayed by her side, offering his steady presence, though he knew this was Ayanna's journey to lead. He had come to understand that more and more with each passing day. They had been through the hardest part, hadn't they? The decision had been made, the choice to walk a different path. Yet, there was still a long road ahead. The settlers hadn't changed overnight, and neither had the world they lived in. But there was something different in Ayanna's eyes now, something softer. It was the spark of hope, not just for the future, but for the moment they were living in right now. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the land in shades of deep orange and purple, Ayanna called for a gathering. The fire flickered and crackled in the center of the camp, its warmth a gentle contrast to the coolness of the evening air. Ethan stood near the fire, watching as the tribe gathered around Ayanna, their faces a mixture of curiosity, uncertainty, and hope. This was it. The moment when everything they had talked about, all the dreams of a future without war, without fighting, would finally begin to take shape. Ayanna stepped forward, her posture as strong as ever, but there was a quiet gentleness in her expression. "I know many of you still have doubts," she began, her voice carrying across the fire. "I know that the weight of our past is hard to ignore, but I believe that together we can build something stronger than the fighting, than the hatred that has been with us for so long. I believe we can find peace." Ethan watched her closely. Her words weren't forceful, they weren't demanding. They were a simple truth, something that could only come from someone who had seen the world broken and still chose to believe in the possibility of fixing it. The tribe was still quiet, waiting for more, but there was a shift in their expressions. Ayanna wasn't asking them to forget their past. She was asking them to build something new. "This won't be easy," Ayanna continued, her gaze sweeping across the faces of her people. "But nothing worth having ever is. I can't promise you that the world will change overnight. I can't promise you that everyone will understand, or that we won't face challenges along the way. But I can promise you that we will try. We will build a future that honors who we are, without tearing us apart." There was a long pause. The crackling of the fire was the only sound in the air as the tribe took in her words. Ayanna's voice had been steady, but the weight of her words hung in the space between them. The firelight danced in her eyes, and for the first time, she felt like the tribe was truly listening. One of the elders, a man who had been with her since she was a child, spoke up. "We've been through much," he said, his voice thick with the years of struggle. "We've seen our families torn apart, our land taken. But we've also seen how holding on to the old ways has only brought us more pain. Maybe it's time for something different." Another elder, a woman who had lived through many winters, nodded in agreement. "It's not an easy choice," she said, her voice full of quiet wisdom. "But we can't keep fighting forever. We have to give peace a chance." Ayanna nodded, her heart lifting as she saw the support in their eyes. It wasn't unanimous, but it was a start. It was more than she had hoped for. "Then we start now," Ayanna said, her voice firm but filled with hope. "We start by choosing to listen to each other. We start by building trust, and by standing together. We will not let the past define us. We will define our own future." The tribe murmured in agreement, the uncertainty giving way to something else, something that felt like the first light of dawn after a long, dark night. Ethan stepped forward, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and hope. "I'll be with you every step of the way," he said, his voice steady, his words simple but sincere. "Together, we'll find a way." The fire crackled, sending sparks into the night sky. The tribe stood together, their faces illuminated by the glow of the flames, their hearts beating in unison for the first time in a long while. There was still much to be done, many challenges to face, but for the first time, they believed that peace was possible. And that was enough to make the journey worth it.